Hello everyone. In this video we're going to create our very first web page for the course, and we're going to use Notepad to do it. Now if you've never heard of Notepad, it's just a basic text editor, kind of like Microsoft Word, but it doesn't have any of the bells and whistles that Microsoft Word has. Also, if you're on a Mac, you won't have Notepad. You'll have to use a different tool. We use Windows in this course, but you could get by using Macintosh if you're pretty capable with using it. I think you could use Text Wrangler on a Macintosh. Before we get started, I just want to show you one thing that you're going to want to change in your settings here. If you click down here on the File Explorer icon, that's the folder down there, go ahead and click on that to open it up. And here's mine over here. And we do want to change the view settings here so that we can see file extensions. We'll be talking about that in just a minute. But to do that, you go to the View tab here, and then you want to check this box if it's not already checked. I've got it set already, but that'll show the file extensions, and we'll be talking about those shortly. What we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and create our very first web page, and I want you to right click anywhere on your desktop and choose New, and then we're going to start out with a text document, so choose Text Document right here. Okay, and now you can see here it gave it a default name right there, and what I want you to notice is that the file name ends in .txt. So I'm just going to hit my Enter key and leave this default name like that, and we're going to change this later. Okay, now because this file ends with a .txt extension, when I double click on it, Windows is going to know that it should open it up in Notepad. So go ahead and do that, and you can see here's what Notepad looks like. And we're going to type in some HTML code to get started here. So for the first thing I want you to do here, you can follow along with me, is type in a less than sign, and then type in HTML, and then a greater than sign. Okay, now I'm going to crank this text up to make it a little bit more visible here. So I'm just going to make it nice and big so you can see it. Okay, now so that's all you should have on in your Notepad right now. And then I want you to hit Enter 2 times. And now we're gonna have a blank line, and then on this new line here, we're gonna type in almost the exact same thing, but this time it's gonna have a / right after the less than sign. Okay, so what we have here is what we call an element. And an element is normally made up of an opening tag, that's this right here, and a closing tag, that's this one right here, and that has the /. So that's the difference between the opening tag and the closing tag. Together, these two tags create what we call an element. Now you can think of an element as a container. And so this marks the beginning of the container, and the closing tag marks the end of the container. So you're going to see a lot of different kinds of elements, but what we have here is an HTML element. Okay, so the purpose of the HTML element is to set the boundaries for your web page. In other words, everything that's inside of our web page is going to be inside the HTML element, in between the opening and closing tags. Okay, so put your cursor on that empty line right here, and we're going to add a few elements inside of this HTML element. And when you add an element inside of another element, you should indent it. So hit Tab. And now what we're going to do is add a head element. So type in less than, and then head, greater than, and now we're going to put a blank line before the closing head tag. So I'm going to hit Return 2 times, and then I'm going to hit Tab. We want the opening tag and the closing tag to be lined up, so they're indented the same. And now here I'm going to put the closing head tag. And so remember, that has the /, the closing tag has the /. And now we've added a head element to our page. Let's add one more element to the HTML element. So what I'm going to do is hit Enter, and then I'm going to hit Tab, and then I'm going to do an opening body tag like this. And then I'm going to hit Enter 2 times, and then Tab, and then the closing body tag. And that has the / there. Okay, what's up with all these less than and greater than signs and the /? Every programming language has what we call a syntax. And syntax is like grammar in English. In English, you have to use certain characters like commas and periods and things like that to make sure that your grammar is correct. In programming, we call it syntax, and those are all the characters that you have to use to make sure that your code is correct here. So that's what we have with these less than and greater than signs. I call those angle brackets. So okay, and now, so what we've got here is an HTML document, also known as a web page. And inside of it, we have a head element, and there's the opening and closing head tags. And then we have a body element, and there's the opening and closing body tags. Okay, so now every web page is going to start out looking like this. And the head element is for what we call metadata. That's information that you won't see inside the browser window. It's information about the web page, but you don't necessarily see it when you open up the web page. That's what we call metadata. We'll talk more about this later in the program. What we want to focus on right now is the body element right there. The body is what everything that's inside that body element is what you're going to see inside the browser window. So this is kind of structured like a business letter where you have the letterhead at the top, and that's not actually the content of the letter, it's just information about the letter. But then underneath the letterhead, you have the content, the actual content of the letter. So that's kind of what this is like here. Okay, what I want you to do now is put your cursor in between the opening and closing body tags or inside the body element, and then we're going to hit tab 2 times. And we're going to add another element inside the body. This time it's going to be an H1 element. So go ahead and do the less than sign and create the opening H1 tag. Now in this case, I'm going to put the closing H1 tag right next to it. I'm not going to put it on a new line, and I'll explain why in a minute here. But here I'm going to add the closing H1 tag. So these two tags together make up an H1 element. Okay. And now the purpose of an H1 element is to make the content inside of it appear big and bold. So put your cursor in between the opening and closing H1 tags, or in other words, inside the H1 element. And then let's make it say hello world. Okay. Now it's a tradition among programmers when they get started with a new language, whether it's their very first language or if they've already learned a bunch of other languages, it's tradition for us to create a little program that just says hello world. So we're following along with that tradition right here. Okay, now we can actually check out this web page in the browser. So what I want to do is save my changes. I can do Control S or I can do File Save right there. Either one works. I like to do Control S to save my changes, and then I'm going to go ahead and close this. Okay, and now here's our document, and it's got that .txt file extension. So if I double click on it, it's going to open it back up in Notepad, and we'll see our code again. What I want to do is turn this into a web page. So we're going to rename this file. So go ahead and right click on it, and then we want to choose rename. Now, if you're on a different version of Windows, it might look a little bit different to rename it. I'm on Windows 10 here, but anyways, hopefully you can figure out how to rename it. But go ahead and choose rename here. And now it's trying to get me to change just the name, but not the extension. I actually want to change the file extension as well. So I'm just going to select everything inside that little box right there. And let's name this hello-world.html. So I'm changing the file extension to HTML, and we'll see what happens here when I hit enter. If I hit enter, this little pop-up window comes up and says, are you sure you want to change the file extension? You can mess things up if you change file extensions. I do want to change it, so I'm going to click yes right here, and then you'll see what happens. Okay, so Windows turned this into a Chrome icon. Chrome is my default browser, so if it's a different icon for you, you might be using a different default browser like Edge or Firefox. But I set my Chrome is my default browser, so that's why I'm seeing the Chrome icon right here. Okay, now since the file extension is HTML, if I double click on it, it's gonna not open it up in Notepad, but it's gonna open it up in my default browser. So the file extension is really important because the operating system uses it to know what application to open up a file with. So here, since it's HTML, if I double click on this, it's going to open it up in my browser, and that came up in my other window over here, but here it is. And there you see in big bold letters is hello world. Now that's the content that was inside the H1 element. Okay. Okay, so there you go. Give yourself a high five because you just created your first web page, and we followed the time-honored tradition of creating a hello world program for our first web page. All right, we're gonna make one more change to the code here. So go ahead and close the browser window. And then now what I wanna do here is I wanna open this up in Notepad again so that we can adjust the code. So if I double click on it, it's gonna open it up in the browser, which is not what I want. So what I have to do here is right click on it and then choose open with. And now you may or may not see Notepad in your list of choices. If you don't see it, you can go to choose another app and you still might not see it. If you still don't see it, then you might have to click on more apps to find Notepad. I actually was able to see Notepad, so I'm just going to click on it right here and then click OK. Here's my code again. I'm going to make it bigger so you can see it. Okay, and just as a quick review, everything inside of a web page is going to go inside the HTML element. And so there's our opening HTML tag and closing HTML tag. And together those make up an HTML element. Every web page that you create should have a head element and a body element. And the head is for metadata. We'll talk more about that later. And the body is going to have all the content that you see inside the browser window when you open the page. Okay, we're going to add one more element here, and we're going to add it inside the head element here. So put your cursor in between the opening and closing head tags, in other words, inside the head element. And now we want to indent this, so I'm actually going to hit tab 2 times, and we'll talk more about indentation as the course continues as well here. What we want to do is add a title element. So we've got to get the syntax right. We do less than, and then create the opening title tag, and then a greater than sign. And now I'm also going to put the closing title tag on the same line here. So I'll just add it like this. Remember, the closing tag is going to have that /, and then it's going to be a closing title tag like that. And now I want to put some content inside of that title element. So I'm going to put my cursor right in between the opening and closing title tags. And I'll just make it say like my first web page, something like that. Okay, now I put this element on its own line just because it's nice and short and it doesn't have any other elements in it. So you can put an element on its own line, the opening and closing tags all on one line if you don't have much going on inside of it. We'll talk more about that later too here. Okay, now we want to save our changes, so you can do Control S or you can do File Save here. And then I'm going to go ahead and close this. And now, since this is an HTML file, if I double click on it, Windows will open it up in my default browser. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on it. And it came up over here in my other monitor, but here's what it looks like. And now you can see here that title, the content that we put inside of the title element shows up in the browser tab. Okay, so those are all the basic elements that go in every web page that we create, and we're going to review this and talk more about each one of those in the next lesson here too. But there you go, there's your very first web page, and you can be happy that you created a Hello World program.